The apartment key was still warm in my hand when my mother called me crying. She said they were drowning. She said the word debt 4 times in the first 30 seconds, each time a little louder, a little more breathless, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed but kept losing her place in. I was standing in the parking garage of my late grandmother's building, the building that was now, as of 11 days ago, as of a signed and notarized inheritance document, mine. My grandmother had left it to me specifically, not to the family, not to my mother. To me, by name, in handwriting that still looked like her, careful and unhurried. And I had stood in that attorney's office 11 days ago and cried quietly into a paper napkin while the deed was being processed, because it was the last thing she could give me, and it felt enormous, and I missed her terribly. 3 hours after that phone call from my mother, I would understand things about my family that I had spent 34 years choosing not to see. But standing in that parking garage, key in hand, phone pressed to my ear, I just felt the cold weight of something I couldn't yet name. It hadn't always been this way. Or maybe it had, and I simply hadn't been paying the right kind of attention. I grew up in a house where love and obligation were the same word. My mother, Patricia, was a woman who expressed affection through sacrifice, loudly and with a detailed accounting of what the sacrifice had cost her. She was generous in the way that keeps score. She remembered every birthday gift she'd ever given, every school fee she'd paid, every inconvenience she'd absorbed without complaint, and she remembered them with the precision of someone who intended to collect eventually. My father, Dennis, was quieter about it. He was the kind of man who went along with things because going along felt easier than the alternative, and because my mother had a way of making disagreement feel like a personal attack on everything she'd ever done for you. They had been married for 38 years. I had watched that marriage from a careful distance for most of my adult life, the way you watch weather you've learned not to stand under. I was 34 years old. I had been married to my husband, Aaron, for 6 years. We had met at a work conference in Phoenix. He was in logistics, I was in project management, and we had spent 3 days arguing about the best way to structure a supply chain before we realized we liked each other. He was steady and practical and patient in the specific way that people who have survived difficult families become patient. He cooked on Sundays and kept a running grocery list on his phone and never once made me feel like a burden for having feelings. He had met my parents at Thanksgiving 2 years in and had afterwards said very carefully, "Your mother is a complicated person." I had appreciated his restraint. I had also known exactly what he meant. We lived in a 2-bedroom house in a quiet subdivision about 40 minutes from the city. We had a mortgage that we were managing, a car payment, the usual. We were not wealthy, but we were careful, and careful had been enough. When my grandmother passed in January, the inheritance had felt less like a windfall and more like a responsibility, a thing that needed to be tended to properly, with respect. The apartment was a 1-bedroom in a solid building on the east side of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fully paid off and in good condition, and it was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $180,000. Aaron and I had talked about our options carefully and quietly over the course of those 11 days. We could rent it and use the income to pay down the mortgage. We could sell it eventually and put the proceeds somewhere sensible. We weren't in a hurry. We just wanted to do right by it and by her. My grandmother had known what she was doing when she left it to me and not to my mother. I understood that now in a way I had not allowed myself to understand when she was still alive. My grandmother had watched my mother for 60 years with the patient, sorrowful eyes of someone who has given up trying to change a thing and is simply trying to mitigate the damage. She had said to me once, when I was about 22 and visiting her alone, "Your mother loves you in her own way, sweetheart. Just make sure you love yourself in yours." I had filed that away in the part of my mind where I kept things that were too complicated to look at directly. The morning of the phone call, I had gone to the apartment to check on a few things. The heat, a minor leak that the super had reported near the kitchen window, nothing serious. It was a gray Tuesday in March, the kind of day that can't decide between winter and spring, and settles for being both at once. I had parked in the garage, taken the elevator to the 4th floor, walked through the apartment making notes on my phone, and then come back down to leave. That was when my phone rang. That was when my mother said, in a voice threaded with carefully calibrated tears, that she and my father were in serious trouble. She said Dennis had made some bad investments. She said she hadn't wanted to worry me. She said they had tried to handle it on their own, that she had even sold some jewelry. She paused there, letting that sit, letting me feel the weight of her sacrifice. But that it hadn't been enough. She said the number. $40,000. She said it quickly, the way you say something you're hoping the other person won't ask you to repeat. I stood very still in the parking garage, my car keys in one hand, my phone in the other, listening to my mother cry, and I felt the knot form in my stomach. The specific knot that I had been feeling since childhood whenever my mother called with a problem, because a problem was never just a problem. A problem was always a door she needed me to walk through, and there was always something waiting on the other side. I said I would talk to Aaron. She said, of course, she understood completely. She would never ask me to do anything without talking to Aaron. She just needed me to know. She said she loved me. She said she didn't know what she would do without me. She hung up, and I stood in the parking garage for a long moment listening to the distant sound of traffic from the street above, and I thought about the apartment key in my hand, and I thought about my grandmother's handwriting on the will, careful and unhurried, and I thought about the way my mother had said, in debt. The specific, practiced weight of it. Something was already moving in the back of my mind, quiet and cold, the way a shadow moves when the light shifts. I drove home. I told Aaron about the call. He was in the kitchen making coffee, and he turned to look at me with that particular expression he had. Not worried exactly, but watchful, the way someone looks when they're trying to assess a situation before deciding how to respond. He asked me what I thought was actually going on. I told him I didn't know yet. He handed me a cup of coffee and said, very quietly, "Claire, before you do anything, call the attorney's office, just to check in, just because." I looked at him. He looked at me. I did not ask him what he meant by just because some part of me already understood, and understanding it out loud would have required me to think about my mother in a way I wasn't ready to yet. I told him I would. I drank the coffee. I waited another hour, telling myself I was being paranoid, telling myself this was my mother, telling myself that some things you do not have to protect yourself against. Then I drove back to the east side of the city. I want to tell you that I had a specific, clear reason for going back that afternoon. I want to tell you I had put all the pieces together and was acting on certainty. But that would not be entirely honest. What I had was a feeling. The kind of feeling that lives below the sternum, neither pain nor nausea, but something with characteristics of both. And Aaron's careful voice saying, just because, and 34 years of knowing my mother, and the way she had said the number so quickly, like she was hoping I wouldn't hear it clearly. That was all. That was enough. I parked in the garage again. I took the elevator up to the building's management office on the 2nd floor, which I had visited once before when I was getting the keys officially transferred. The property manager was a compact, efficient woman named Rose, who had worked in that building for 17 years and who had the particular self-possession of someone who has seen a great deal of human behavior and stopped being surprised by most of it a long time ago. I told her I wanted to confirm the current status of Unit 4C, my unit, just as a formality. She pulled it up on her computer. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite discomfort, but a careful, measuring attention that had not been there a moment before. She said, slowly, that according to what had been filed with her office that morning, there had been a request to update the occupancy contact information for the unit. She said a woman had come in claiming to be the owner's representative. She said the woman had left paperwork. Rose set a folder on the counter between us. I opened it with hands that were steadier than I would have expected. There was a single sheet of paper inside, folded in thirds. It was a notarized authorization form, the kind used to designate a property manager or representative for an owner who cannot be present. The authorization was signed with my name, my signature, or something very close to it, rendered in blue ink at the bottom of the page. The notary stamp was from an office 2 miles from my parents' house. The date was that morning. I had been in that same building that morning, 2 hours before, and I had been alone, and I had not signed anything. I looked at that signature for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 15 seconds. The parking garage key fob was still in my left hand. My right hand had flattened against the counter, palm down, and I could feel the cool laminate surface under my fingers with extraordinary clarity. The coffee I'd had at home was sitting in my stomach like a stone. I thought, with a strange calm, so this is what it is. And then I thought, with equal calm, I need to be very careful about the next 30 minutes. I thanked Rose. I told her not to process anything from that folder. I said I would be back in touch. She nodded, watching me with those quiet, experienced eyes, and said she had a feeling she was going to remember this day. I almost smiled. I took the folder. I walked back to the elevator. I rode it down to the garage. I sat in my car and I looked at the steering wheel for a long time. My mother had called me crying at 11:14 in the morning. She had told me my parents were $40,000 in debt. She had asked me to tell Aaron. She had kept me on the phone for 11 minutes while I now understood. Someone, possibly her, possibly my father, possibly both of them, had been at a notary's office 2 miles from their house, producing a document with my forged signature, bringing it to my building, filing it with the property manager. 3 hours. She had needed 3 hours. And she had spent those 3 hours making sure I was elsewhere, making sure I was distracted, making sure I was thinking about my parents' debt and not about the apartment. I called Aaron. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a moment, the particular silence of someone absorbing something they had already, somewhere, been prepared for. Then he said, "Call the attorney. Call her right now, before you do anything else." His voice was steady and low. "Don't call your mother yet. Don't let her know you know. Call the attorney first." I told him I would. He said, "Claire?" Just my name, said like it meant, "I'm here." I said I knew. I hung up and I called Margaret Holloway's office. Margaret Holloway had been my grandmother's estate attorney for 20 years and mine for the past 11 days. Her assistant put me through in under 2 minutes. I told Margaret what I had found. I read her the description of the authorization form. I told her about the forged signature and the notary stamp. Margaret was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. And then she said, in a tone that was precise and unhurried, and left no room for anything but the matter at hand. "Do not contact your mother. Do not go to your parents' home. Come to my office. Bring the folder. Come now." I said I would be there in 20 minutes. I sat in the car for one more moment before starting the engine. The parking garage was quiet, except for the distant hum of the ventilation system. I thought about my grandmother leaving the apartment to me specifically, not to the family. I thought about her voice saying, "Love yourself and yours." I thought about the careful, unhurried handwriting on the will. She had known. Of course she had known. She had done what she could, and now I had to do the rest. I started the car. I pulled out of the parking space. I drove to Margaret Holloway's office, and I did not cry once on the way there. Margaret's office was on the 15th floor of a building downtown, and it had the particular quality of spaces where serious things are settled. Thick carpeting that absorbed sound, windows that looked out over the city from a height that made everything below seem more manageable, bookshelves lined with the kind of reference volumes that nobody takes down except to make a point. Her assistant offered me water. I took it. I sat in the leather chair across from Margaret's desk, and I set the folder on the surface between us, and I watched Margaret read the authorization form with the focused attention of someone who is simultaneously reading the document and calculating its implications. She set it down. She folded her hands. She said, "This is forgery. It's a criminal offense in this state, and the civil implications are significant." She said it evenly, not with drama, the way someone states a fact about weather. The authorization form is worthless on its own. It doesn't convey ownership, but the intent is clear. Someone was attempting to establish a foothold, a false paper trail of representation that could have been used to facilitate a transfer of the deed at a later stage. She looked at me steadily. "Do you have any doubt about who filed this?" I said no. She nodded. She said she was going to contact the notary's office to request the identification records from that morning's transaction, which notaries are required to retain. She said she was going to file a formal complaint with the county recorder's office to flag the property record against any unauthorized modifications. She said she was going to send a certified letter to the management office of the building confirming the current and sole ownership status of the unit. And she said I needed to think carefully about what I wanted to do next, because the next step was mine to decide, and there were several options, and not all of them involved law enforcement. Not yet. I sat with that for a moment. The city spread out behind her through the windows, orderly and indifferent. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, the tears, the careful weight of the word debt. 11 minutes of phone call, calculated to the minute. I thought about my father, who was quiet and went along with things, and I wondered how much he had known and how much he had simply not asked. I told Margaret I needed 48 hours before I decided anything involving law enforcement. She said she understood. She said she would proceed with the protective filings immediately and wait for my decision on the rest. She said, and this is the part I have thought about many times since, "Whatever you decide, Claire, make sure it comes from clarity and not from wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt they haven't earned." I looked at her. She said it without apology, without softening it, the way my grandmother might have said it. I thought that was probably not an accident. I drove home in the late afternoon light. The city was doing that particular thing it does in March when the sun gets low. Everything gold-edged and somehow both sharp and soft at once. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for a moment. Aaron was home. I could see the kitchen light on, and I could smell, even from the driveway with the windows closed, that he was making something with garlic and olive oil, the specific smell of him trying to take care of me when I needed taking care of. I went inside. He looked at me from the stove. I sat down at the kitchen table. I told him everything, slowly and in order, from the authorization form to Margaret's office to the flagging of the property record. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he turned the heat down on whatever was cooking, came and sat across from me at the table, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I told him I didn't know yet. He said that was fine. He said we had time. He put his hand over mine on the table and left it there, warm and solid, and we sat like that for a while in the kitchen, while the garlic smell deepened and the light outside went from gold to gray. I did not call my mother that evening. She called me at 6:47. I watched the phone ring. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, warm, ordinary, asking how I was doing, mentioning nothing about the debt or the apartment. Her voice the precise, relaxed texture of someone who does not yet know that anything has gone wrong. I played the message twice, studying the tone of it, the performance of it. My mother had always been a gifted performer. It was possible she had no idea her plan had been discovered. It was also possible she was simply buying time. I could not yet determine which, and it mattered. The next morning, I slept badly and woke at 5. Aaron was still asleep. I made coffee, the good kind, dark roast, in the small Italian percolator that had been my grandmother's, and that I had brought home after she passed. I stood at the kitchen window with the mug in both hands, and watched the backyard go from black to gray to the particular blue of early morning, and I thought about things. I thought about the fact that my parents had gone to a notary's office and produced a document with my forged signature. I thought about what that required. The planning, the decision, the deliberate choice to do it. It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't a panic move. Someone had found a notary, made an appointment, and gone there with intent. Someone had sat across from a notary public, shown identification, and sworn that a signature was genuine when it was not. That was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That was a choice made by someone who had looked at my inheritance, the thing my grandmother had left to me specifically, and had decided that their need for it outweighed my right to it, and had decided that I would not find out, or that if I did, it would be too late. I thought about my grandmother's careful handwriting on the will. I thought about the word temporary, which my mother had not yet had a chance to say to me, but which I already knew would be coming. It's just temporary. We were going to tell you. We were going to pay it back. You know, we would never really take it from you. We're your family. I had heard variations of that speech before. Not about something this large, but the structure of it, the minimizing, the reframing, the appeal to family as the thing that should override everything else. That was familiar territory. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. I also knew that if I let it go that way, if I allowed myself to be walked back into being the reasonable, accommodating daughter who gave her parents the benefit of the doubt one more time, I would lose something I could not afford to lose. Not just the apartment, something harder to name and harder to recover. I refilled my coffee. I stood at the window a little longer. By the time Aaron came downstairs at 7, I had decided. I called my mother at 9:15 that morning. I kept my voice even. I asked if she and Dad could meet me at the apartment, my apartment, at 2 in the afternoon. I said I wanted to show them the place and talk about some things. My mother's voice brightened immediately. She said, of course, how lovely she'd been wanting to see it. She said they would be there. When I hung up, my hands were steady, and my voice had not wavered, and something in my chest felt very quiet and very cold, the way the air gets right before a front moves through. I spent the morning on 3 phone calls. The first was to Margaret Holloway, who confirmed that the notary records had been formally requested and that the property filing was complete. No modifications could be made to the deed record without my physical presence and verified identification. She also told me something I had not expected. The notary who had stamped the authorization form had already called her office, having been contacted by the county recorder's inquiry. The notary, a woman named Sandra, had been disturbed enough by the inquiry to review her records. She had identified the client from that morning. It had been my mother, alone, who had signed and presented the document. My father had not been present. Margaret said Sandra was prepared to provide a formal statement. I told Margaret where I would be at 2 o'clock and asked if she could join me. She said she would clear her afternoon. The second call was to Rose, the property manager. I asked her to be present at the apartment at 2 as a witness. She said she had been expecting my call. I appreciated that more than I could say. The third call was to my aunt, my mother's sister Diane, who lived 40 minutes away and who had always occupied the particular position in the family of being the person who told the truth when everyone else was telling comfortable stories. Diane and my mother had a complicated relationship for exactly this reason. I told Diane what had happened. There was a long silence on her end of the line, and then she said, in a voice that was tired rather than surprised, "Claire, I am so sorry, and I am not surprised." She said she would come. I told her she didn't have to. She said she knew she didn't have to. My parents arrived at 1:58. I watched them from the window of the 4th floor hallway as they came through the parking garage entrance below. My mother, in a blue coat, moving with the brisk efficiency she always had when she was feeling purposeful. My father, a step behind her, in the way he had always been a step behind her. I watched them cross the garage and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, a kind of grief that sat beside the anger and would not be dislodged by it. These were my parents. I had loved them in the complicated, conditional way you love people who have shaped you in ways you've spent years sorting out. This moment was not something I had wanted. It was something that had been made necessary by choices that were not mine. I met them at the elevator. My mother hugged me. She smelled like the perfume she had worn my entire life. Something light and powdery that I had always associated with her, with Sunday mornings, with the particular texture of being a child and feeling like someone was taking care of things. I held the hug for a second and then stepped back. My father shook my hand and looked at me with eyes that were slightly too careful, slightly too still. The look of a man who knows something is coming and has decided the best response is to be very quiet. I let them into the apartment. Margaret Holloway was already there, standing near the kitchen counter, her briefcase on the table. Rose was near the window. Diane was standing by the bookshelf that had been my grandmother's, the one still holding a few of the books that hadn't been moved yet. Old paperbacks with cracked spines, a row of Reader's Digest condensed volumes that nobody had touched in 20 years. My mother stopped when she saw Margaret. Just stopped, mid-stride, for one full second, the way a clock stops between ticks. Then she rearranged her face into something pleasant and slightly puzzled and said, "Oh, I didn't realize we were having a meeting." I said, "Sit down, Mom." She looked at me. I looked back at her. Whatever she saw in my face made her sit down. The next 30 minutes were some of the most difficult of my life, and also some of the clearest. Margaret opened her briefcase and set 3 documents on the table. The first was the authorization form with the forged signature. The second was the notary's formal statement identifying my mother as the sole client who had presented the document that morning. The third was the property record confirmation showing the current ownership of the apartment. My name, only my name, unchanged and protected. My mother looked at the documents. Her face went through several things quickly. Surprise, calculation, and then, finally, a version of the performance I had predicted. Her eyes filled with tears. She said they had been desperate. She said she hadn't known what else to do. She said she was going to tell me. She had only wanted to have something in place first, something to offer the bank, just temporary, just to buy them some time, and she had been going to explain everything, and of course, she would never actually have taken it. It was mine. She knew that. She would never. She said she was sorry. She said all of this quickly, one thing after another, like she was trying to cover ground before anyone could interrupt. My father sat very still beside her and said nothing. When my mother stopped talking, the room was quiet. I could hear the building's heating system, a low, steady hum. I could see, from where I sat, the row of my grandmother's paperbacks on the shelf, their cracked spines, the particular beloved disorder of them. I said, "Mom, you sat across from a notary public and told her that signature was mine. You knew it wasn't. That's a crime." I said it without raising my voice. Margaret is going to walk you through what comes next legally. But before she does, I want to say one thing to you, and I need you to hear it. My mother was crying now, or something that looked like crying. I looked at her steadily. "Grandma knew you," I said. She knew exactly who she was leaving this apartment to and why. She wrote my name on that will with her own hand. You were her daughter, and she looked at everything she had, and she put my name on it. I have spent a long time trying not to understand what that meant. I understand it now. The silence after that was different from the other silences. It had weight to it, and shape. My father said, for the first time since sitting down in a low voice, "Patricia." He said it like it meant enough, like it meant we've done enough. My mother looked at him. Something passed between them that I could not read, but that Diane, from her place by the bookshelf, received with a small, sad nod. Margaret Holloway cleared her throat and began, in her precise and unhurried way, to explain the situation. The notary's statement constituted documented evidence of fraud. The county recorder's office had been formally notified. The path forward, she explained, was mine to determine. I could file a criminal complaint, which given the evidence would almost certainly result in charges, or I could pursue a civil resolution, or some combination of both. She was not recommending either path. She was informing me of what existed. She set a final document on the table, a formal written acknowledgement of the incident, which she was asking both my parents to sign, confirming that they understood the ownership status of the property and relinquished any claims or representations regarding it. If they declined to sign, she would proceed with filing the criminal complaint that morning. My mother reached for a pen. Her hand was not entirely steady. She signed. She passed the pen to my father without looking at him. He signed. He set the pen down. He looked at his hands. Diane walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on, the same way she might have at any family gathering, with the quiet competence of someone who has always been the one to hold things together after they break. The small, ordinary sound of water running into the kettle and the click of the burner felt almost unbearable in its normalcy. I looked at Margaret. She nodded. It was done. My parents left 20 minutes later. My mother hugged me at the door. She tried to, and I let her arms touch my shoulders, and I did not pull away, but I did not hug her back, and she felt the difference. She said, at the door, in a very small voice, "I'm sorry, Claire." I said I heard her. I did not say I forgave her, because I did not yet know if that was true, and one of the things I had decided that morning at the kitchen window was that I was done saying things that were not true in order to make other people more comfortable. My father stopped beside me on the way out. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who has known something for a long time and has lived with the discomfort of that knowledge, and I looked back at him, and I thought there was probably a conversation we would have someday that we were not ready for yet. They got into their car. They drove away. I watched from the window. Diane came and stood beside me. She had made 2 cups of tea. Real tea, not the herbal kind, but strong black tea with a little milk, the kind my grandmother had always made. She handed one to me without ceremony. We stood at the window together and watched the car until it was gone. "She's your mother," Diane said after a moment. "I know," I said. "That doesn't make it okay." "I know that too." We drank our tea. Rose excused herself quietly and left. Margaret packed her briefcase, told me to call her by Friday with my decision regarding the criminal filing, shook my hand, and went. The apartment was quiet. It was just Diane and me and the grandmother's paperbacks on the shelf and the low hum of the building and the late afternoon light coming through the windows going gold. "She leaves them to you, you know," Diane said, nodding at the books. "I know. I'm going to take them home." She would have liked that. I looked at the books, the cracked spines, the faded titles, the particular accumulation of a long reading life. My grandmother had read every one of them, had held them, had turned their pages in the evenings, probably in this room, in a chair that was no longer here. I thought about her leaving this apartment to me by name. I thought about her voice saying, "Love yourself in yours." I thought about how much she had understood and how she had expressed it in the only way she could. A legal document, a name in careful handwriting, a gift that was also an instruction. The next few weeks were not simple, and I will not tell you they were. I did not file the criminal complaint. I made that decision on Friday morning, after 2 more conversations with Margaret and a long evening with Aaron, where we sat at the kitchen table and talked through every angle of it until we'd run out of things to say and sat quietly in the conclusion. Filing charges would have meant a trial, or at least the process of one, and it would have meant making everything public, and it would have meant doing to my parents, to my father, who I believed had known and gone along with it, but had not been the one to sit across from the notary and sign. Something that I wasn't sure I was willing to do. Margaret said she understood. She said the civil agreement they had signed was binding and enforceable, and that if they made any further attempt on the property, the criminal path would still be available. I said that was what I needed to know. My parents and I did not speak for 7 weeks. My mother called twice in that time, leaving voicemails that I listened to and did not return. They were not apologies, exactly. They were the kind of messages that expect you to do the work of treating them as apologies. I did not do that work. My father called once, on a Sunday evening, and left a message that was only 12 seconds long and consisted of him saying my name, pausing, and then saying, "I'm sorry, Claire. I should have stopped her." I played that message 4 times. I did not call him back immediately, but I knew eventually I would. I rented the apartment. The tenant, a quiet, organized woman named Janet, who worked as a hospital administrator and kept a small potted herb garden on the kitchen windowsill, moved in 6 weeks after everything happened, and I felt something settle in me the day she picked up the keys. Something that felt like the apartment being exactly what it was supposed to be. I used the first month's rent to have the locks changed and a new security system installed, because that felt right, and I used the second month's rent to make an extra payment on the mortgage, which was what Aaron and I had originally planned, which was what we had always intended. I took my grandmother's books home. I arranged them on a shelf in the spare room, not in any particular order, just the way they had been in the apartment, their cracked spines with their familiar titles, a little archive of someone who had read carefully and lived carefully and tried, in her last act of giving, to pass that care along. Aaron came into the room one evening while I was arranging the last of them. He stood in the doorway and looked at the shelf. He said, "That looks right." I said it did. He said, "Are you okay?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "I'm getting there." He nodded. He went back to the kitchen. The smell of garlic and olive oil followed him. 4 months after the afternoon at the apartment, my father called on a Saturday. Not a voicemail this time. He called and waited for me to pick up, and I did. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. He told me things I had not known and things I had suspected. He told me he had tried to talk my mother out of it and had not tried hard enough. He said that last part quietly, without excuse, and I appreciated the absence of excuse more than anything. I told him I had heard him. I told him I did not know yet what the road forward looked like, but that I was willing to look for one. He said that was more than he deserved. I said maybe. But I said it without cruelty, because the cruelty would have cost me something I didn't want to spend. My mother has not called since the second voicemail, which is now 3 months ago. I think she is waiting for me to make the first move, which is the pattern we have always had, the one where I smooth things over and she is allowed to receive the smoothing as a verdict in her favor. I am not going to do that. I don't know exactly what I am going to do. That road is still being built, one careful step at a time, and I am building it on my own terms, which is something I have not always allowed myself to do. What I know is this: the apartment is mine. The deed has my name on it, only my name, in the county records, in the permanent and unambiguous way that legal documents create permanence. Janet is growing basil on the kitchen windowsill. The mortgage is a little smaller each month. The books are on the shelf in the spare room, their cracked spines holding all that accumulated reading, all that accumulated care. And the key to the apartment, the one that was warm in my hand in the parking garage that morning when my mother called, is on my key ring now, right next to my house key. I feel it every day when I reach for my keys. It is small and ordinary and completely unremarkable, the kind of object nobody looks at twice. My grandmother pressed it into my hand 11 days after she was gone, through the mechanism of a will and an attorney and a deed with my name on it, careful and unhurried. She knew what she was giving me. She knew what she was trying to protect. I reach for my keys in the morning and I feel it there, small and certain, and I think, I know, Grandma. I understand now, and I am taking care of it.